the presence of this vast number of police and the horses is not only provocative, it's there to intimidate men. Well, here we're seeing the police state in action. Here is it in 11 black and white. Here it is.
Putting out so much money just to keep these mines going when you don't need them.
His record over the past 12 months means that he ought to have been made redundant any time during the course of that period.
No, I'll pick it no matter what she says, and I'm going to tell you something else if she's watching. I'm going to tell you something else. Tell her this. When we've got bits out, we're going to get stuck back into power stations and give them some humping. And get them out. And all these blacklegs that are sneaking in now with lorries to keep going to power stations. That's on this morning. We shall have them and all.
What sort of government is it which sees its authority passed to strike committees?
Tories have never forgotten the defeat inflicted in 1972 and in 1974. Equally, neither of the miners forgotten the lessons of 1972 and 1974.
You talk about the ruthless, manipulating few. Now, will you not negotiate with them ever?
I will never negotiate with people who use coercion and violence to achieve their objective. They are the enemies of democracy. They are not interested in the future of democracy. They are trying to kill democracy for their own purposes.
Oh, what a long, long strike. But if we have to go through it all...
I will never, ever be a party to Tory party legislation which seeks to castrate and mutilate this trade union movement, and nobody in the NUM or anywhere else can be a party to that kind of legislation.
This year, as before in our history, we've seen men and women with brave hearts defying violence, scorning intimidation, and defending their rights to uphold our laws. By their action, we have seen a new birth of leadership in Britain. And that is the most important thing, the most enduring thing that is going to come out of this coal strike. A new birth of leadership.
I was 19 at the beginning of the Warrington print workers' strike, and I was living in Leeds. I was at uni in Leeds, and I was already a trade union member. I became a trade union member when I worked in a broccoli packing factory in Kent, where I'm from. I was very active in the Labour Party right from being 14, and they had the Labour Party Young Socialists then. And although I couldn't officially join it, I joined it as soon as I could at 16. And I was very involved in the trade union. And so when I went to university, I went with the trades union coach to the print workers' strike, and it was in Warrington. It was at Eddie Shah's factory, and basically they were taking workers' rights and using non-unionised people to get the papers out.
The horses were sent in, and the situation quickly broke down.
Well, I'm getting in between them.
The police say they were forced to charge, but the miners allege deliberate aggression and brutality as they were gradually driven away from the coking plant.
I didn't have any idea that the police they were there to find lost children and rescue people and catch bad people, and that was how I viewed them. They never have featured in my life at all, and even in previous trade union struggles that I'd been involved with, they hadn't featured in. But I saw from that night and in subsequent times when I was on the picket line with the miners, how that they behaved and how things had really changed. So things changed from when they took on the print workers and actually smashed the print workers' unions and took the papers from out of London, and it was a very, very hard beginning. They took one union on, and then they were leading up to taking the biggest and strongest maybe union in the country at the time.
Good morning, you're watching TVAM. Now, faced with a loss of 20,000 jobs in the next year, will the miners be driven into a nationwide strike?
It was a lot of pictures of violence on the behalf of the workers and their families, and about them being scavengers and work shy, and there was never there was very little until the end of the brutality of the police in return, or in fact to begin with, because I can't tell you what they did to people, what I saw. It was also fed through the political agenda of the time as well. A lot of rhetoric. And Maggie Thatcher was a very powerful and very clever woman, and she was able to get her voice heard everywhere. It was a question of dividing not the working class, it was dividing the working class on themselves, not the middle against, it was the working class against themselves. It divided families, it divided my family. I ran my father, who was a very strong socialist, but he couldn't believe that the police were doing this. My mother had actually voted Conservative because she thought the trade unions were too powerful, because this is who were blamed for things, and the trade unions are too powerful, they need bringing in line, and she called a rabbit we got at the time Thatcher, when Thatcher got in, because she was so pleased. And we don't live in a mansion, you know, we moved across the road, and she was able to kind of think, well, we moved out of this one council area, so we've crossed the road now, so I'm going to vote Conservative, because the message came out really well. There was actually, I can't remember what newspaper, but it's a really famous picture of a woman with her hand like that, and she's about to be smashed with a police horse. People didn't believe it at the first. People didn't believe it. I got kicked between the legs. I was a 19-year-old girl at the print workers' strike. Why it's really important, especially for a media student, to kind of really grasp. If they hadn't have bashed in the print workers' union, they got control firmly in the hat of the media. They took control of the media. It was theirs anyway in money, but they controlled it totally, because any opposition from within, they now had quashed. They'd all practiced all the things they were going to do, and they brought this amazing barrage onto the people of this country. And they didn't show pictures of policemen doing what I saw happen, waving their bonuses in front of starving. I mean, they were literally starving miners' families. They waved their money in front of them. You never saw that. I saw it. But the thing that changed the people's perception, I think, was that one picture was phenomenal in making that. They thought that they could crush the spirit of people. They thought that, and when they tried to crush the spirit of women at Greenland Common, which was again similar sort of times, and again it was a totally different issue, but it was about stopping Trident, and they thought that they could crush the spirit of the people of this country, but they never did, not in any one of the struggles I mentioned. The government itself had led, I mean, the police, people joined the police, people joined the army, working class people joined the army, because there's nothing else out there for them. And nobody, you know, and it's a career, and it's a way of seeing the world, and from time immemorial they've been pushed into these kind of things, and it's their own family. I mean, there's stories and accounts still of families that don't speak to each other because they were on the wrong side of that divide, whether they had been what is called a scab, they'd gone to work, or they'd been policing it, or they'd been involved in some way. And it's not Thatcher's family. They weren't divided against themselves. They didn't have that pain. I totally lay the blame 100% at the door of the government.
Willing and active cooperation between independent sovereign states is the best way to build a successful European community. To try to suppress nationhood and concentrate power at the center of a European conglomerate would be highly damaging and would jeopardize the objectives we seek to achieve. Europe will be stronger precisely because it has France as France, Spain as Spain, Britain as Britain, each with its own customs, traditions, and identity.
3 years ago, I committed to the British people that I would renegotiate our position in the European Union and hold an in-out referendum. Now I am delivering on that commitment. You will decide, and whatever your decision, I will do my best to deliver it.
What's the driving force for you for this out?
One is immigration and the other is just to take back our own country.
Yes, let us take back control of our borders.
People just flooded in.
Britain sends £350 million a week to the EU.
They always have a go at the white man because if he says something wrong, he's racist.
Everyone's worried about immigration.
Let's take our country back again.
People could get houses, now you cannot get a house.
They're making palaces compared to what we're living in.
Everyone wants to be over here.
Our national health is suffering.
There's a lot of people ride the system.
We want our country back.
The choice is in your hands.
My name is Ramona Chapman. I live in Bawtry, which is in Doncaster, and I am a senior teacher at Wales High School.
I work within the church. I'm a Church of England priest, and that's in the community. I work in mental health. I'm a local councillor, which I'm very proud to be. I'm actively involved in the trade union and Labour Party movement, and I've carried on, never stopped. Unfortunately, I don't think it's portrayed in a particularly positive sense.
Whatever it was very one-sided. It would either be really, really bad or some really nice stories of, I don't know, I think it was primarily Polish, less so about Romanians, but also about how lovely Polish people that had opened a shop would have to go back and whatever. So in my view, it was very, very polarised, either really good or really bad.
I have Polish friends that are wonderful nurses, wonderful radiographers, because I work in the NHS, and they're going. I mean, we need them. We haven't got enough nurses or radiographers. If you don't get, it's got crisis in radiography at the moment. If we don't get more, this is a message that's being fed to them. They wouldn't feel wanted and not wanted if the media hadn't kind of portrayed them as scroungers and people that just come here to go on benefits and live in houses that like mansions and send money back to Poland, that, you know, that's part of our money and our system, taking our jobs. It's just, they wouldn't feel like that, would they, if they hadn't been given that message. And I think the message is terrible. I think it's wrong.
I think timing is something that I think does play a role. I think just before Brexit, it did tend to sort of obviously be very negative, and immigration was seen as an issue. There were some voices that were kind of trying to point out that, you know, we all contribute through national insurance contributions and whatever. But I think those were a little bit too maybe feeble. Not to mention the fact that I also think you hear what you want to hear. So I think because of all the mass kind of portrayal before, I don't know whether people still took in the positives. I think very much in the run-up to Brexit, everybody would have tried to kind of simplify it in a way that they thought would be meaningful to the audience. Like I teach English, so I know I sometimes teach my children, if they try and create a text, to think about the audience and what kind of target audience they would have and what they would want to hear. And I think the media definitely did that stupidly so. We knew we were worried about immigration, so we absolutely went from the sensational way of presenting something that's reality.
Lay it at the feet of the government again, because it was in fact Theresa May who said many years ago, when she was Home Secretary, that she was going to put a tough line on immigration. And it is that attitude that's filtered in it, and again with Brexit and some of the more right-wing parties like UKIP and even more right-wing than them, the EDL, and people are winning this battle of hearts and minds again. And it's again that how the working class turns on itself. Maybe it's not north-south this time, but it's actually white working class against non-indigenous working class people. So it's the same old. As long as people don't stick together and work together, they can control.
I would go beyond the class thing, and I'd kind of say possibly people that haven't had any experience of multiculturalism, most likely will go and believe whatever they hear. And I think the view that was presented in the media was very biased. I don't blame them, because in many ways, I don't know what it's like to be an astronaut. So I've listened to Team Peak talk about what it was like there. So by analogy, you could argue, well, if they don't know what it's like to, live next to an immigrant and what an immigrant's life is like, or what they contribute, what they don't contribute, or whatever, how would I get my information? It is through the media. But again, which type of media? And the interesting thing was, again, it wasn't only the tabloids that went with a sensational approach.
Well, it is, but also it's the other sort of fall down of which happens a lot during times of great austerity, i.e. during Thatcher's years or during the current austerities. People are very, very poor. People are working really hard and are living on food banks. And I know nurses that have to rely on food banks. So that brings a sense of resentment, a sense of fear, a sense of desperation, and it all creates a different climate than when you can drop this in. And be it the miners or the Eastern Europeans or the Asians or somebody, it creates a climate where people are going to listen because they're desperate, they're upset, they see things going on in their society. Is it breaking down, the family's breaking down, or is it this or is that? And then you've got people with very simplistic messages like the Conservatives and Farage and Trump, and say, wow, we'll make England great again or America great again, and we're going to bring jobs for white people and working class people. Really? What about the steel industry? One part of the working class, and it's not in another country, is screwing the steel workers in Rotherham. It's like, it's very, very, very influenced by who is in government.
I don't know whether the government would have influence on the media, but I think the relationship is sometimes very unhealthy, in the sense that I think by the way the whole system has been set up is by definition polarized. So I don't think we teach a kind of a middle ground, and therefore perhaps that's why when everything like this is being reported, the media would also go with one side or the other. And I don't think we've been able to kind of... I think with time, the conversation, you know, after many months, but I do have to say, it felt to me like it was many months of presenting this in a very kind of biased way. We started looking at the middle ground, but I don't think the political approach is middle ground at all. Not even kind of fair in terms of let's present as many of the facts as we can. The political parties in themselves have also a duty to kind of, I don't know, build up their own argument, which again is polarised. The way we asked the question was yes or no. There was nothing in between. I think the government can influence how people see it, but it's primarily by being who you represent. For example, just by being a conservative and standing in front of working class people and saying we don't need to be in, I don't know, in EU or whatever. I think people sometimes vote with the label that represents the person rather than with the argument that they bring to the table.
I voted, and obviously I worked against Brexit. I campaigned against Brexit, but I didn't realise how terrible the effect of Brexit was going to be. I just thought, oh well, and that we lost. It's going to be awful, but it's not going to be that bad. But it really is that bad.
It's without a doubt is negative. There was a time when I was really proud to say I'm Romanian, whereas now I keep it quiet. Purely because the way I think about it is, if pre-Brexit, I don't know, maybe there were 4 people that if you asked them, two of them would have said, I don't know, I'm really, well actually one would have been pro-immigration, another one would have been totally against, but 2 of them would have been on the fence. I can guarantee you the 2 that had been on the fence are not on the fence anymore. And the reason why they were on the fence before is possibly because they didn't know enough, whereas now what they do know, it's totally biased by the way the media has portrayed it. And media, not only tabloids, everybody portrayed immigration as a massive issue. It is an issue, but if you look across the globe, it's an issue that's affecting globalization because of we're affected by because of globalization. It's not to do with we let people come into the UK and whatever. I think it's a much wider phenomenon, but we don't really understand the causality, and it's a complex issue that I think we try to present it in a very simple way. What I noticed, even the people that perhaps nobody would see themselves as a xenophobe. Anybody you asked, they kind of say, but that's not me. I used to teach a child, and after the Brexit, when they said, hurrah, he was outside my classroom, and just said, great, we have won, we're going to keep the immigrants out. So I went to him and I said, well, do you realise that I'm an immigrant? And he said, well, I didn't mean you, I just meant the Roma. So I think it's also interesting to see how the rhetoric and the narrative that we tell ourselves kind of manifests itself in terms of this issue.
As you can see from the financial sector, and indeed some of our big investors, our big firms and companies really didn't want Brexit. However, some of our more right-wing parts of the Conservative Party, and like I said, Farage, etc., your Trump elements, that they really did want it, because again it divides the people. I mean, the EU, I don't know very much about the EU, and I'm not maybe its biggest understanding fan or whatever, but the EU provided enormous bank and raft of our workers' rights. So things like the Working Time Directive, that doesn't sound very important, but it was really, really important to me as an NHS worker, because it meant that my shifts weren't going on. So if I make mistakes in treating and working with people with mental health problems like I do, and after a long shift, which is 12 hours anyway, they were much longer beforehand, because you could work any hours you want, or any hours that the bosses wanted you to do. These rights came from the EU. They were not our rights beforehand. They came from the EU. Things came from the EU for that really health and safety. The enormous raft of our important rights came from there. So I've got a really strong suspicion that they might really like some of these things, like the European Working Time Directive, to go. Well, the working class of all ethnicities, but especially, really upsettingly, the Asian and Eastern European communities. But definitely all of us are going to be affected because we won't have the medicines. They can buy their medicines anywhere. We won't have our rights. They don't care about those. They won't want us to have them anyway. So we're all going to be affected. You can only rule a class if you can divide it. And if people are too busy looking for their Eastern European neighbour as being their fault why they're having to use a food bank, they're not looking to the real reason why they're having to use that food bank, and that is that they're not being paid enough, they have no rights, and they have no future, and it's been taken away from the same Tory government that took it away from the miners as well. I don't think they're more susceptible, that they are suffering more. And I think that we are every bit, as you know, as capable, because you're standing there doing this amazing, clever, phenomenal thing. We're every bit as capable and everything that's bright. I just think we're suffering. And the same as the working classes in America are suffering. If you're dirt poor and you are literally using food banks or even not got nothing in America, it's easy. It's easier to blame because you can do something, albeit really wrong. You can do something. You can have some agency. It's the futility, the frustration, and the desperation, I think, makes them maybe ripe for that kind of manipulation. If you've got a full belly, if you can read, you've got access to all sorts of things, you might actually be able to have the chance to question a bit more, because you've got the space in your brain, because you're not thinking about where you're going to find the next meal or feed your family. I think people's attitudes have changed. I think they've entrenched a bit. I also think that once the reality, because like I said, I've campaigned against it because I did think, sort of intellectually, it just sounded a bit, I didn't expect it to be so vile. And what's happened since, I didn't expect my friends to be leaving the NHS. I didn't expect that. I think people would change maybe back the other way once they realise what they've done. Like they did in the miners' strike. I mean, we've got Billy Elliot, we've got Brassed Off, we've got things, and I'm waiting for plays. I want our playwrights to write stuff about Brexit and about my friend leaving, Magda, leaving the NHS. I'd like somebody to tell her story, like they did with the miners. I think they would. I've got faith in us. Even though the miners lost, like I said, it changed the hearts and minds of the people, and it was worth it. And I honestly believe the working class is better than this, better than Brexit.